state your name and how you spell it?
Trevor Phillips.
Now into the more serious questions. In your own words, describe second wave feminism.
Do I have to? It's to be equal with men of the society and to gain more respect. So, if you will, please state your name and how to spell it.
My name is Dave Beckham.
Thank you very much. So now what we're going to do is we're going to move on to some further questions. Okay, so in your own words, can you describe second wave feminism for me?
Second wave feminism is an uproar of women to gain privileges such as equal workplace, voting rights, and political movements.
So, do you know anything about the NOW organization?
No.
No? Not really?
No.
Alright, fair enough.
So if you will please state your name and spell it.
My name is Becky Wuhan.
In your own words, describe second wave feminism.
Second wave feminism is described as an uproar of women to gain privileges such as equal workplaces, voting rights, and political movements. To be equal with men of the society and to gain more respect.
Thank you, that's a very good answer. How do you feel about men coming back from war and coming straight back into their original jobs?
I believe that us women deserve to have these jobs. We've been all locked up in our houses.
Explain to me who Betty Friedan is and what she did in second wave feminism.
Betty Friedan is a big role model towards the second wave feminism. She helped start the NOW organization, and during the time she wrote a book called The Feminine Mystique.
Do you know what the feminine mystique is?
The Feminine Mystique was a book that would explain certain aspects of the second wave feminism, that would explain what men would do when returning home.
Okay, thank you for doing this interview, and goodbye.
Hi, today we take a look at the Korean War. At the end of World War II, Korea was divided into a communist northern half and an American-occupied southern half. By 1949, most of the U.S. military had departed from the South. Americans were considering a $150 million bill for South Korea, but Syngman Rhee, the leader of South Korea, so often talked about invading North Korea that U.S. leaders feared giving him too much aid. Kim Il-sung, the leader of North Korea, had the same idea, but he had people backing him. Kim was to strike first, but his invasion of South could only take place after Joseph Stalin agreed to aid him. With new confidence that America would not interfere due to the lack of American funding after the bill lending aid to the South failed to pass for another year, suggesting that America would stand down in the event of an invasion in South Korea. Along with the successful test of the Soviet Union's first atomic bomb, the war started with a surprise attack by Kim's army, crossing the 38th parallel on June 21, 1950. With the support of Joseph Stalin and aid returning communist Koreans who were fighting under Chinese Communist leader Mao Zedong. Though it may seem that the Korean War was only fought between both North and South Korea, that is false because many countries outside of this republic joined in also, one of which is our home turf of the United States of America. During this war, the U.S. put forth a lot of money and aid to assist the South Korean Republic. The Korean War had a larger economic effect on the U.S. than that of World War II. It seemed sketchy, but at the time, inventing new technology that would aid in the war was popular. This spike in inventions was not only expense, but cost a lot of time and effort. The Korean War cost the United States at the time $30 billion. Now this quantity may not seem as large as it is. However, the $30 billion used at the time equivalents to $320 billion at this time. The $30 billion that was used in the Korean War did not help any for the South Koreans. This instead led to many deaths against the Republic and the United States. At the end of the Korean War, South Korea ended on the bottom of popularity and wealth, whereas North Korea benefited from this war. However, this did not mean that North Korea ruled over the South. At the end, the North and the South divided themselves from each other into different republics. The Korean War ended on June 27, 1953, impacting the two contenders in the war while also impacting the ones who offered aid to each group.
the Cold War in the 1960s, civil rights were highly prominent in the public eye. Minorities in the U.S. began pushing back against discrimination. One well-renowned contributor to the movement was the African American population. African American veterans came to demand the same rights they fought for in World War II and the Korean War. Obstacles like the Jim Crow laws represented the discrimination they experienced on a daily basis. The Jim Crow laws segregated all aspects of life. This included the segregation of schools based on race. This form of segregation gave white students an unfair advantage. The Supreme Court case, Brown v. Board of Education, challenged this segregated schooling system. The ruling opened up opportunities for desegregated schools. However, this didn't come without a price. Soon after the ruling, the 101st Airborne Division was assigned to escort black students to their school safely. During the Civil Rights Era, the publicity of rights activists rose. Voices such as MLK's and Malcolm X were heard nationally. While each of them approached problems differently, Malcolm X often took a radical stance, while MLK was known to take a peaceful stance. In the face of violent opposition, the most well-known of MLK's movements is the March on Washington, where he gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech.
Japanese internment camps ended in 1944 to 1945, lasting for 2.5 years. The events leading up to these internment camps were anti-Japanese sentiment among farmers, while politicians who sided with the anti-Japanese Constitutions, and the general public, which was escalated by Pearl Harbor. About 120,000 Japanese Americans were relocated into camps, leading to entire families being moved into one-room cells or barracks, and were given dull, small portion meals 3 times a day. Several people died due to stress and lack of medical care. The government apologized publicly in 1968 and began reparations to Japanese Americans for property they lost. In 1988, Congress passed legislation that gave formal payments of $20,000 to each surviving internees, which was $60,000 in all. Native Americans are the first people to inhabit North America, yet they face horrible segregation and unfair treatment. Originally the people of a land flourishing with natural beauties and boundless resources, they now have to live in conditions of those similar to third world countries. During the Civil Rights Era in U.S. history, a group of 200 Native Americans came together to take Alcatraz. They did this to bring awareness to the poor living quality of reservations. Not only was there this group, many tribes came together to form the American Indian Movement, or AIM, to fight for more of Native Americans' rights. This group especially fought for issues like economic independence, autonomy over tribal lands, protection of rights, and restoring the native culture. The first organized Mexican political participation in civil rights group was formed and promoted in the 1950s. Soon after, Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta organized the United Farm Workers. This was a union for migrant workers which included minimum wage, insurance, and collective bargaining. The UFW soon joined the Agricultural Workers Organization Committee. They began striking against grape workers in Delano. This lasted 5 years and drew lots of attention. Chavez advocated strikes, picketing, boycotts, marches, and other nonviolent means to achieve the union's goals. After many attempts to draw attention, including a month-long hunger strike, the UFW signs a contract with California table grape growers. Many protests and organizations were going on at this time, including 1,500 students meeting in Denver in 1969 to hammer out political and cultural agenda. Students demonstrated to press for bilingual education, the hiring of more Chicano teachers, and the creation of Chicano Studies program. Young Chicana feminists even formed a number of organizations, including Las Hias. By 1970, dozens of programs were offered throughout the nation.
Okay, my name is Juba Omiche Clayton, or Joanne. Well, I think, violence and inequality were the primary issues. I mean, when I was growing up, I lived in Texas, and Texas is not known for being liberal, and there were lots of atrocities there. So, when I speak about civil rights, I guess I need to speak of it from a personal viewpoint rather than a historical viewpoint, because that's what it was for me. It was not history, it was an experience. It was a very interesting experience for me going to school, because I started out in an all-black school with, all in an all-black neighborhood, and at middle school I went to the first integrated schools, and the adjustment was really difficult. I was one of maybe 3 black people at the school. So I didn't have the community of friends. I didn't have people that I knew. And as I said earlier, racism was pretty rampant, even in high school. And so my friends and I were the objects of hate notes and taunting with language and things like that.
Right.
Husky voice, stout step, with fist as well as hands that battered down doors, and ironed, starched white shirts. How they led armies, these head-ragged generals, across minefields and booby-trapped kitchens to discover books and desk, a place for us. How they knew what we must know without even knowing a word of it themselves.
Wait, there needs to be more context. The North Vietnamese government aimed to reunify Vietnam under communist rules. In 1961, South Vietnam signed an aid treaty with the United States. The United States began air raids on North Vietnam and on communist-controlled areas in the South. By 1966, there were 190,000 U.S. troops in South Vietnam.
The reason for the United States was so fearful of communism is because they viewed them as evil. Communist nations mostly don't allow people to own land, follow their religious beliefs, or speak and act freely. Since this contradicted core American beliefs, America was afraid of the communist spread.
As a result of this fear, Harriet Truman established a policy of containment towards the Soviet Union. This policy was not to fight a war with the Soviets, but to keep them from extending their existing boundaries.
Now I'm going to tell you how we're not going to fight communism. We're not going to transform our fine FBI into a Gestapo secret police. That's what some people would like to do.
South Vietnam is already under attack. sometimes by a single assassin, sometimes by a band of guerrillas, recently by full battalions.
John F. Kennedy believed that giving up in Vietnam would be a great mistake. Kennedy lost patience with Ngo Dinh Diem, the representative leader of South Vietnam. Kennedy hoped that he'd be replaced by a popular general if the U.S. helped overthrow him. Instead, Diem was overthrown, then assassinated.
I have started my position on the
Thủ tướng Ngô Đình Diệm tuyên bố Việt Nam đã không ký kết.
South Vietnam was in chaos. There was no government. Kennedy was then murdered and wasn't able to witness the effects of his beliefs.
There were 3 million killed, wounded, and the war left hundreds of thousands of children orphans. After JFK, Lyndon Johnson came into office.
In summer 1964, North Vietnamese torpedo boats attacked the U.S. This was proven to be a misread radar sighting, but Johnson did not care. He called to arms against North Vietnam.
In March 1965, the first Marines were ashore in Da Nang. 3 years later, 536,000 were in Vietnam.
The temperature is almost 100 degrees, and the jungle stifles even the tiniest breeze. The going is slow. There could be a North Vietnamese regiment hiding a few yards away, and no one would see it.
Operation Rolling Thunder. Johnson authorized the bombing of North Vietnam.
Basically, America believed that they were on Vietnam's side, while simultaneously destroying it. North Vietnam quickly rebuilt the land America damaged.
Here we have an ex-commanding officer from the Vietnam War. Officer, what is your opinion on Operation Rolling Thunder?
Well, this is going to sound ironic, but in order to save the town, we had to destroy it.
We bombed the crap out of them, basically, and they have rebuilt them several times. Well, we'll keep bombing them.
Goodbye disillusionment. For the first time in history, Americans began to see the carnage of war on TV. All of the brutal footage had people trusting Johnson less.
It was on the television every night. We don't see that now, do we? We don't see the bodies coming back from Iraq. We don't, but then we did. Maybe we need to see that so people can learn not to go to war, not to do that stuff.
Bobby! Bobby, what did they do to you, Bobby? Bobby!
It's hell. That's what I think about it.
From 1968 to 1972, the Youth Rebellion was tearing America apart.
Listen, people, I don't know how you expect to ever stop the war if you can't sing any better than that. There's about 300,000 of you out there. I want you to start singing. Come on. And it's 1, 2, 3. What are we fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give a damn. The next stop is Vietnam.
Anti-war demonstrators protest U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War in mass marches, rallies, and demonstrations. Central Park is the starting point for the parade to the UN building. The estimated 125,000 Manhattan marchers include students, housewives, beatnik poets, doctors, businessmen, teachers, priests, and nuns.
End the war! End the war! End the war! End the war! End the war!
So, what do you think about all this?
Well, you see, the thing with communism is that,
My cousin did 2 tours of duty over there in Vietnam. He was a Marine. His first one, he was very lucky not to get hurt. The second one, it actually disabled him for the rest of his life. He ended up killing himself. He said, I can't take it anymore. Just let him stop taking his meds and just let himself die. This was a nice, strong, burly Marine who just became very disillusioned with life. As it was hard, there wasn't a lot of the support.
Vietnam is not our war. We must say no. Are we gonna go? Hell no, we won't go. Hell no, we won't go. Hell no, we won't go. Hell no, we won't go.
The draft forced many young Americans into war. This was one of the main reasons for protest. A lot of the men avoided the draft by moving to Canada or Sweden.
Tom, hey, how you doing? Hell of an attraction, huh?
The counterculture, represented by the hippies, famous for their interesting culture and habits through the 60s and 70s, believed the war was unwinnable.
This is the now generation. They feel disenchanted with the world around them. While they may, for the most part, be outside the mainstream of American life, they are a part of the wave of the future.
After the war, North Vietnam communists made re-education camps. South Vietnam refugees tried to escape by boat, and many drowned.
The lasting effects of this war, the memories of those involved, will live on for generations.
Cold War, the war that never got lit. Starting shortly after World War II because of the lack of trust in foreign affairs throughout the world, with Germany being in a stage of total depression after losing the war and hurting their relationship with the whole world. Higher power countries made it a goal to start babysitting the now poverty-stricken world power.
The daily life of a standard nuclear family was shaken by World War II. The newfound technology that came from the war created a whole standard for living such as rockets, space travel, better transportation, more gender-friendly work environment, while also discovering a whole new mistrust for people in general because of the communist scare and other threats. The fear created whole new levels of mistrust. As the fear continued to expand, bomb drills and fallout shelters became part of the everyday life. Children would get under the table and cover their heads, hoping it would protect them from a nuclear explosion.
All right, I'm gonna ask you a few questions here. I'd like you to repeat the questions after I say them to you. Okay? What is your name?
My name is Granny Smith.
When were you born?
I was born in 1939.
What was the daily life for you guys during the Cold War?
Well, me and my family were pretty happy most of the time. There were a lot of bomb drills we had to do.
What was the daily life for you during the Cold War?
Well, my family and I were on the edge most of the time because there were bomb drills going on, and every morning we wake up and look at the news to make sure we didn't get bombed or anything, you know what I mean?
How often were the bomb drills?
Well, they were about once a week, and then they got more frequent as time went on.
How did your family deal with the fear of bombings?
Well, my husband left a few times.
How did your family deal with the fear of bombings?
Well, we were scared a lot of the time. People kept telling us to leave town, but we didn't.
Well, thank you, ma'am, for coming in here and taking the interview with us.
You're welcome.
Acting, therefore, in the defense of our own security and of the entire Western Hemisphere, and under the authority entrusted to me by the Constitution, as endorsed by the resolution of the Congress, I have directed that the following initial steps be taken immediately. To halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. All ships of any kind bound for Cuba, from whatever nation or port, where they're found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons, be turned back. It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union. I call upon Chairman Khrushchev to halt and eliminate this clandestine, reckless, and provocative threat to world peace and to stable relations between our two nations. I call upon him further to abandon this course of world domination and to join in an historic effort to end the perilous arms race and to transform the history of man. Our goal is not the victory of might, but the vindication of right. Not peace at the expense of freedom, but both peace and freedom here in this hemisphere, and we hope around the world. God willing, that goal will be achieved.
Some say the war is still going on secretly. Although there is no more terrifying bomb scares of a daily basis, the world is still a scary place with many secrets that have not yet been discovered.
I know that it was a source of the greatest strength to him to know that there were thousands of people all over the United States who were together with him, dedicated to certain principles and to certain ideals.
He might not have been in office for very long, but his impact will live on for a long, long time. We were part of a big family, 9 kids, 5 girls and 4 boys. John, he had a lot of friends around school, had a lot of girlfriends. Later on, he joined the Navy with my oldest brother Joe, made lieutenant, assigned to the South Pacific to fight the Japanese, commanded a torpedo boat, the PT-109, got himself a Navy Marine Corps medal and a Purple Heart. He was the first president to have ever received one. After Joe had died, he'd gone back from the war. He'd started up his career in politics, ran for Congress, won in 1946, then spent 3 years in the House of Representatives. Then he got elected into the Senate, got a wife, then he had some more of his back problems. He had a leg that was shorter than the other. After he nearly got picked to run for vice president in 1956, he decided he was going to run for president, worked long hours, traveled around the U.S. a lot. 4 years later, he ran with a Texas senator named Lyndon B. Johnson, and he won it. Though I'd be lying if I were to say I'm happy about that, as he was dead 2 years later.
What were some of the things he did while he was in office?
Started what we called the New Frontier. Wanted to fight unemployment and inflation, so he increased government spending and worked with big businesses to keep wages high. He was always fighting for the little guy, trying to do what was right for the underdog. There was the business with the moon, as he was always he kept trying his damnedest to keep the Soviets in their place without ever having to fire a shot. That wasn't how it was with the Bay of Pigs.
Could you elaborate on that?
You probably already know this, but the Bay of Pigs was an invasion of Cuba. Not so much of an invasion as it was a slaughter. Exiles from Cuba were trained to fight against the Castro regime and to invade Cuba. My brother had been briefed on this before the inauguration, and in 1961, he authorized it. The invasion was supposed to happen at night, with 2 airstrikes to bomb Cuban airfields. Used old bombers repainted them to look like Cuban craft. Missed most of their shots, and John canceled the second attack. Some of the ground force got sent out to sea. 1,200 surrendered, more than 100 were killed. That was likely the darkest part of his administration.
Are there any moments that were more successful than the Bay of Pigs?
Absolutely. A big point is how important he was getting to the African American the same treatment as any human being deserves. While King was in prison in Birmingham, the police commissioner had been hosing down protesters and putting police dogs on completely innocent people. John sent in several thousand troops to an air base in Alabama. When George Wallace said that he would stand in the schoolhouse door to prevent black students from going to the University of Alabama, John federalized the Alabama National Guard. And hell, if you want to talk about something else, we could talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis, when John and a team of his advisors, including myself, kept the country from a world war.
Could you take a moment to talk about Kennedy's involvement with the space program?
Absolutely. Eisenhower had started his own space program before my brother had made it into office, but the only thing that he succeeded in was lagging behind the Russians. John wanted to hold something over the Soviets, wanted to boost America's confidence in itself, so he promised this nation that it could commit itself to achieving this goal before the turn of the decade is out. Landing a man on the moon, returning him safely to Earth. We haven't quite gotten there yet, but we're close, and we wouldn't have gotten there without my brother.
Now, before we go, there's one last topic I'd like to cover, and that's the assassination of your brother.
Right. I'll be brief with the details. He was shot in the head in his motorcade. He always loved to have an open top for his car. Loved seeing the people, but I guess someone didn't love seeing him.
Right. But there's something I want to discuss a little more in depth, and that's the theories behind his death.
Oh, there was a lot of those. Some say there was a magic bullet, as no one found any shots despite the 2 that were fired. Some say that Oswald got help. Some say there was a second shooter on the grassy knoll.
Do you think any of them hold water?
I think the CIA had something to do with it. John was always doing things they didn't like, giving blacks rights and always working for peace. No, war built a strong economy. Maybe they wanted to start up another world war to build up our...
Thank you for having me, Mr. Nixon.
Well, thank you for having me.
So, let's talk about you for a minute. You were the first president to resign. Was that hard on your family?
It was a very hard time for me and my family when I decided to resign from presidency.
So, I want to talk about Vietnam. Do you believe the war could have been avoided?
I feel like it could have been avoided at all costs. We should have never gotten involved.
Well, you got rid of the draft, so what was your thinking there? What was your goal?
I wanted to enact on my agreement that I would bring peace with honor. I want to show America that I was going to do what I promised.
Very knowledgeable of you. Noble of you. So, let's talk about the Watergate scandal for a minute. Were you involved in that?
I was indeed involved with the Watergate scandal.
Thank you for coming, Mr. Nixon.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Darwin Johnson, and I'm here today to talk about the era of limits. Lewis Arnold here, and I will also be interviewing several individuals on the topic of the era. Our next topic will be about a new view on the world and a new lease on life. Here's Vivian Smith with the report.
Hello, nice to see you, Arnold.
So Vivian, you've been recently interested in environmentalism.
I have been, Lewis, and let me tell you that the oil crisis was a bust, and it helped the Americans realize that our resources are all but permanent. So after coming from the era against war, the U.S. soon started to target the war on environmental damage. At first, the movement had distraction, but not enough probability. This was to change, however, with the introduction of the Silent Springs. The educational piece was written by Rachel Carson, biologist who was studying the harmful and long-term effects of both of the environmental and public at large.
Aside from the supreme loss of fuel, the country was also losing its economic miracle. Wars cost money, and having proxy wars after a recent Great War doesn't help. So eventually, the economy was dropping faster by the day. Here to talk about the subject is more.
Hello, the name is Wade Patterson. Yes, the economic crisis certainly was a bust. It certainly is a topic that is coming up even in recent times. I'd like to say that probably this cause of this economic crisis had to have been the fact that America had stopped focusing on making its own goods. Yes, by the 80s, we seemed to have dismantled most, if not all, our factories. And we certainly started becoming more consumerist, buying more than we were making. So, this caused economic uprising. As the cost of living rose, our cost of production went down, thus creating an economic crisis, which affected Americans even in greater ways. This is also what possibly led to the oil crisis and probably many other causes, as many people needed to look to alternatives to even save a quick buck, just so that they can get that nice designer shirt. Or maybe even order some tie-dye. Or maybe some Thai food. Thank you. This has been Wayne Patterson, and I thank you for having me on the air.
Among the many ill-remembered things of the era of limits, one of the most rancid of these was the presidents, which is sad to say, because they certainly tried. More on the subject is our wonderful Ernesto Morales.
Hey Lou, how's it going? The presidency has been pretty shaky at this point in time. In fact, Richard Nixon is the best known for his role in the largest scandal of all time, the Watergate scandal. The scandal involved raising wages for enlisted men and women of federal employees, which caused more major upset in already weak economy. This scandal took place inside infamous Watergate Hotel, where Nixon created the organization, the Environmental Protection Agency. The agency has so far been companioned mainly by Democrats in the 1970s. Aside from his more shady dealings, in the end, he tried to cover his tracks and abused measures. Many accused him of undermining Lyndon Johnson's peace talks. The movement subsides in the conflict with Vietnam.
Sad to say, for all the good he did, he also stained his own image, despite not wearing the camera-friendly makeup. One other side of the era would have to be the oil crisis, a dangerous time for an already crippled America in terms of production, which all started with the Arab nation not acknowledging the state of Israel. This later resulted in armed conflict, which our reporter, Marcus Lewis, has the scoop on.
I thank you, Darwin. And might I add, the Gulf is more hotter than the jacuzzi filled with cooking oil. It didn't help that our good old pal Nixon tried to help ease the conflict by arming one side of the fight. Yes, in an effort to stay on good terms with Allied powers, Nixon started to issue arms to Israel. This in turn led to Arab nations to form OPEC, the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries. Though the name sounds convincing, it really was nothing more than a dirty drug cartel. Out of fear and spite, Nixon announced embargo of Persian oil, along with a lot more countries like the UK, Germany, and Denmark. However, this backfired horribly, causing gas prices to go up and the turmoil to ensue.
That's all the time we got, but thank you, Marcus, for the input. Join us for the last topic of the night, the energy crisis. Along with the cost of gas reaching new heights, the newly formed embargo also helped us Americans realize something far worse than a long line at the pumps, as much as we believe the contrary. The Earth is far from unlimited. So now we have Claire Lynette on the current events of the energy crisis. From reform to regressions, economical boom to bust. The 60s weren't perfect, but they were certainly a revelation for us since the 1920s. Yes, this series of mishaps does have its place in history, but one thing is certain, at least we can say we've changed. Thanks for listening, America.
Baby boom was very positive for everybody in America. Everybody, you know, the baby boomers were born between 1946 and 1964. And it was a huge population growth. And things were really, really good in America then. There were lots of jobs. lots of young men coming back from the war who wanted to get married and wanted to have families. So I would say, you say stress, I would say if there's any stress, it was positive, it was good.
What was your childhood like?
It couldn't have been a better childhood. I was the oldest of 4 children, and we lived on a ranch, and I didn't particularly care for school, but I did enjoy riding horses.
Okay. How many siblings did you have in your family? 4, you said, right?
I have 3 other siblings, and I have a sister and 2 younger brothers. All 4 of us were born within 5.5 years.
What was your family doing to earn money?
My family was farmers and ranchers, and so there was always something to do.
Your family lived a life of wealth or poverty?
Wealth and poverty are both very relative terms. At the time I was growing up, I didn't really, we were much better off than many of the other people.
What was going on in the surroundings that you had noticed?
We've changed a lot over the years, but people haven't changed. And the love that people have for their family and for their community still remain.
Were any teenagers rebellious during the 1960s?
I think teenagers have always probably been somewhat rebellious. Somebody told me one time that if your teenagers weren't rebellious, then you would never want them to leave home if they were as sweet as they were when they were little kids. You know what the difference is, I think, now, and have you watched the movie Grease? They're still replaying it after all these years on HBO sometimes. So that's exactly how it was. That's exactly how it was. I know that film is kind of a parody of it because it's a musical, but so much of it is just how it was. There was still teenage pregnancy, there were still fights, there's still drag racing in Albuquerque now, they were drag racing. The difference now, I think, is the growth of the gangs and the growth of the drug use. I think it's made it meaner. It wasn't mean then. And it wasn't scary then. And I think to be a teenager now sometimes, in some places, I think it would be scary.
How did the Kennedy assassination affect the country?
The Kennedy assassination was huge. You know, there have been other presidents that were assassinated. I think we forget that because they were back in another century. But that President Kennedy was so popular. He and his wife Jacqueline were that was the first presidency that had been recorded on TV as much as it was. It was just constant coverage, and he was a great public speaker. He was as engaging as Barack Obama is. He was smart. He was very, very popular, and he was running for a second term, and I feel pretty certain that he would have won. So the fact that he was gunned down in what's a drive-by shooting was horrifying. It was horrifying to everybody. It was a terrible, terribly sad event. And then Lyndon Johnson took over as president, and he was so different than Kennedy. He wasn't good looking. He wasn't a great speaker, but he got it from all of Kennedy's policies that he'd wanted to get through the Congress. Johnson got him through. So it was kind of a nice way to remember him.